items in the pouch in front of you.
Have a safe and informative journey.
Hello, I'm Nathan Hartman, and this is Dreamfinders, a podcast about the creative culture of Disney theme parks. Today's guest on the show is Hal Bowers from the Retro WDW podcast. If you've never heard that show, Hal and a crew of fellow podcasters go deep into Disney World history, and I mean deep. We're not talking casual fans here. These guys are basically historians, and Hal, in his own right, has a bunch of history with the parks. He took a tour as a kid of the Magic Kingdom under construction. He was a part of the infamous Mesa Verde Times group who explored Horizons and a ton of other rides without anybody's permission whatsoever. He was at the opening of Hollywood Studios, and he got to explore Spaceship Earth at Epcot's 35th anniversary. Needless to say, Hal Bowers has stories, and he's more than game to share them with us. All of that and more is coming right up here on Dreamfinders. Hal Bowers, welcome to Dreamfinders.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing well, and I'm very excited to have you on because you have a lot of history with Disney park stuff and a lot of love for it. So it's going to be a really fun conversation, I think. What I want to start with, though, is you're currently a Floridian, as am I.
That is correct.
Are you native to the Sunshine State?
I am not. I grew up in West Seneca, New York, which is a little town outside of Buffalo. And part of that reason is probably why I'm such a big Walt Disney World fan, because my sister lived in Orlando. My brother-in-law and my cousin both did construction on Walt Disney World in 70 and 71. In fact, one of them was in the earliest land clearing stages. So we would come down every year from actually before it opened. We were there in March, and I got to take a bus tour that the families of employees got to go on. And then we came down every year until we finally moved to Orlando in 79. So be going from snow cold, terrible Buffalo to beautiful Orlando and Disney, it was like that. I was hooked.
Yeah, you never want to go back.
Exactly.
Generally when I ask people about their earliest memories of Disney parks, it doesn't start when there's nothing there. But that's fascinating. Tell us a little bit about that bus trip and what that experience was like. And when did you clearly the name Walt Disney still meant something. It wasn't like someone no one knew. So you knew there was some magic to be had to happen. But when did you start to go like, I think this is going to be really special?
Yeah. So, so growing up in the 1970s, I'm trying to remember now if it was Saturday night or Sunday night, but like Walt Disney Presents was on TV. So we had a little bit of an inkling of what was going on, with the show. And there was so little children's entertainment at that time. There was you'd watch Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom and Walt Disney Presents, but this is just the era of network television and maybe one independent station and PBS. So there was very minor amounts of kids TV. So of course every kid was glued into, whatever the Disney program was. So I had a little bit of that, and I'm sure my mom took me to see Bambi or something when that was re-released. I think that might have been. It was either that or the Aristocats was the first Disney film I saw. So I knew I kind of liked it, and we must have gone to some little regional parks or something. So when we went in 71, I know we went to the Preview Center. I have some perhaps vague recollections of that. I only found out about the bus thing later on because some relatives, my sister told me about it, and then I was able to actually look that up against some cast member newsletters and figured out what the dates was. I was told that we got put on a bus and we got driven up Main Street, and it was just whatever the state of construction was. So this was the middle to late March, I think the 19th or the 20th. And from my understanding of the timetable, it's there was almost nothing done. It was a huge rush to get it ready for October. So there was probably Main Street was probably the buildings were framed, and the castle was probably partially up, but that's about it. When we went back the next year, though, and it was open, then it was much better.
Yeah, right. A much better experience overall. That's for sure. Now, do you remember that first trip to the actual park?
So we went every year. So we have some photos. I have what are probably a collection of memories from ages 4, 5, 6. There's a couple of distinct things that I could remember. Like, I think when I was 5, I got brought up on stage at the Golden Horse Show Review, and I don't know the gentleman's name, but it would have been the person that was in the Wally Bogue role. So I got brought up, and he did, balloon animals, and I was the butt of his jokes. And I remember being terrified because he told me, he was like, "Oh, just go stand here on the trapdoor." And I knew what a trapdoor was. So I knew that the possibility would be that it would open. And then the drummer did this gag where he would hit the snare drum, I think, whenever he said trapdoor. And I probably jumped 1,000 feet in the air. And he was able to do that. I think they figured out I was pretty gullible. So they must have did it 4 or 5 times.
It was a good show.
Yeah, my parents, I remember, it's funny. I can actually remember that experience probably because it was fun and terrifying.
Yeah, fear-based.
I can remember almost the entire thing, what he told me, what I said. And as we walked out, there was a bunch of people who was like, "Oh, does he work here?" I guess my expressions were so animated, people assumed that I was actually a ringer part of the show, not just some random kid pulled out of the audience. So that was interesting. But I remember, normal stuff, waiting in line for the Jungle Cruise. And my niece, I always went with my niece. She loved the Tiki Room, so I blame her for my love of Tiki because she always wanted to go to the Tiki Room first. Then I would want to go on the Jungle Cruise, and we do that. And of course, we did the Skyway, did the Mickey Mouse review. And I remember just being utterly bored for the most part in Tomorrowland because for the first years of the park, there was nothing there. No People Mover, no Space Mountain. It's we had Flight to the Moon, which was okay. I think that one was fine. But the 360 movie.
Yeah, okay is a good way of talking about Flight of the Moon.
The 360 movie, I think it started out with America the Beautiful. That was all right, but it didn't. I'm 4. I don't want to stand and watch a movie. Right. Although it was, as I got older, I appreciated it more. But that was about the big things, and of course the monorail ride. That was huge.
Did you get the opportunity to go up in the front, unlike today? Wonderful.
I had done that at least a couple of times over the course of the years.
I'm always fascinated by what I kind of call Disney sense memory, or this thing that I feel like a lot of people have of these early childhood visits, because it's such a sensory place, but you can't place everything.
Right.
I remember I have this blurry image of color and motion, and I attribute it to the Carousel of Progress for a very long time, until it might even have been, and we'll talk more about your podcast at Retro WDW later on, but it might even have been talking about Dreamflight, where I was like, that might have been Dreamflight. And I went through a bunch of, photos and all sorts of stuff. And I'm just trying to get something in my head to connect. It's fascinating the sense memories that we sort of pick up on, even if we don't really can put them all into pieces. There's just something about it.
Oh, and there's those times where you just smell that natural gas smell, and you feel like you're on the Jungle Cruise, or that weird dank water smell, and you're like, this is like pirates. What's going on?
Right, exactly. And sadly, it's never either of those two things most of the time. What is the thing? Now, going every year is certainly a wonderful benefit to your childhood. But when does that sort of, I go to Disney all the time, turn into a fan of Imagineering and design?
So that is probably due to Dave Ensign. He was actually in my same class in college, and I give him 100% credit because somebody gave me the Christopher Finch Walt Disney book, the Art of Walt Disney. I had the little skinny one. So there was a section in the back about Imagineering. And I'm sure that you only had a handful of books as a kid. So you're just I poured over it over and over again, but I don't think it really clicked. But Dave actually was the first person to say, there's people that do this. He was a huge Mark Davis fan, and he had collected a bunch of Disney magazines and old issues of Disney News. And he gave me some of those, and he started showing me, the people that were doing things, and that changed everything. Because I was like, oh, and I was in art school. I didn't know how, and I was going to be, our classes were kind of this hybrid of graphic design and computer animation. So I was interested in animation. So I thought, oh, maybe I'll get into computer animation, but it was actually very, very crude at that point. So
yeah, it was like 87 to 90, correct?
Yeah. The world was not quite ready for that yet. So, so he showed me that, and I realized in hindsight, well, shoot, if I would have known that, I would have went into industrial design or tried to, go off on some other tack. But it was fascinating to find out, like, oh, there's people that do this, and there's this artistic discipline, and it's just cool.
And you mentioned like creative outlets that you went to school for. What were your creative outlets as a kid?
I did a lot of different stuff. So, I played instruments, probably. I played keyboards okay, guitar really not so great, but so I had some music, and I drew, just like every I don't know if every high school kid doodles. It's like, but I would, doodle on my stuff. Mm-hmm. But I was not particularly focused as a child.
As artistic people kind of can be.
Yeah, I watched a lot of television and a lot of ads, which is, I think, why I got into, later on, it's like I got into advertising and computers, and I'm like, I'm using all my art in advertising now. So it kind of worked out.
Yeah, right.
Went where they were supposed to. But yeah, I was a huge consumer of television. So I wasn't on the creator side of the thing at that point.
What made you decide to go for graphic design then and go to college for that?
It was, so I looked at all the things I enjoyed doing, because I liked acting, I liked music, I liked writing, and I liked design, and I think it came down to, well, which one of these is something that I could actually make a living doing. So I was like, so from the competition standpoint, I'm like, but honestly, one of the things that really impressed me was Epcot Center. So I can recall being 14 or 15, standing in line, waiting to go in. And then I started to notice, like, that there were these color combinations in each pavilion. Like, the hosts would be wearing, this color combo, like the seas, I think, was like this blue and this green, and Imagination was a purple and a pink, and Energy was this orange and this red. And I saw that these color combinations were working together in the costumes, and then in some of the decor, and then on the signs and the logos. I mean, the logos for those pavilions were just absolutely brilliant. And all that started to kind of congeal together and go like, oh, wow, there's something going on here. So I think that really started to get me interested in that. And that's about all I knew, because I was not particularly educated in what any of this stuff meant, which is funny.
There's a bit of wayfinding in that as well, which is this, the concept of designing things so people can find where they're going, and everything's very clear. And when you're going through the parks a lot, one of the things that is very, especially the first few times, those are so critical to your experience and having a positive experience. So I'm sure all of that kind of gets enmeshed in your love of how color palettes work together and graphic design and all of that's pushed together.
Oh yeah, all that color coding stuff. I mean, it's so basic, but very few people consider that. Especially, and I use that I would use that trick as many times as I could. So if I was doing an annual report or any kind of long piece where I needed to say, like, this is a section and that's a section, I'm like, well, duh, you color code it, because that's what you do. I honestly learned a ton of stuff from the parks. I mean, as I started to get older, and as I was in school and started to recognize a lot of the patterns of things are done, like the Epcot example, or even just in the Magic Kingdom, how you can use, the concept of the weenie in order to drop one person from one place to another. It's like, these things you can use as a designer in your life all the time. Even as I started to get into some, like, very simple computer animation, I looked at the way that Small World was constructed back in the early days of the web and some of the multimedia stuff. It's like you couldn't move like a lot of objects at the same time. And I had a project when I was working on where I needed to have want to do an effect of like flashing lights in circle shapes, and I couldn't get it, couldn't solve it. I couldn't figure out how to do it and not have the computer slow down to a crawl. And so that weekend I happened to go on It's a Small World, and I noticed in the finale section that they have that exact effect in real life. And what they do is they have a bunch of circles cut out of the plywood, and then they literally just have these like silver streamers behind it with a fan blowing on it. And as the silver streamers move, it shines the light differently, and it looks like this flashing light effect. So I'm like, oh, well, maybe if I just take a gray box with stripes of different shades of gray in it, and I just move it back and forth, and then behind like a graphic with like the cutout holes in it, it'll give me the effect I want. Sure enough, worked like a charm.
It's like Mary Blair knew what you were thinking.
Yeah, exactly.
What's interesting is you already brought up Dave, and you met in college, and he sort of imprinted his Disney nerdery on top of you. When was did you guys kept hanging out post college too, though, correct?
Yes, that's true.
So you leave, you graduate college. It's never easy to find any sort of job that is creative or creative adjacent even post that. What did you do right after college? Because you guys were still around the area.
Yeah, so he ended up moving back to, I think he moved down to Bradenton. I was lucky enough when I graduated, I was able to get some just very basic entry level graphic design jobs in the city that I was in. So I was able to stay in Sarasota, which is where the Ringling College of Art and Design is, where I went. And he went to Bradenton, and so we were able to meet up. We would meet at the park, and which was not easy in the days before cell phones and things like that. Because if you're running late, we'd literally be driving like 2 hours, or I'm sorry, more like 4 hours every week in order to get there.
Were you going to the park weekly at that point?
Yeah, as much as, if not weekly, every 2 weeks. As I progressed further in my career and got some other more high stress jobs, a weekend at the park became, or a day or two at the park became a good way to get rid of some of that stress. Because I tend to be working like 60 to 80-hour weeks sometimes. One
of the best stories or experiences that I think you probably have ever had, I would assume, you can definitely correct me if I'm wrong, is that you and Dave and several other people met up and were there at the opening of Disney MGM Studios.
Yeah.
What was that experience like?
It was really fun. But also it's another of those things where it's like, it was kind of, I don't want to say scary because it wasn't scary, but like we went into that with no preconceived idea of what we were going to experience. There was only a handful of literature that was printed ahead of time. There's no blogs, there's no television shows. There was nothing saying like, oh yes, you're going to see this and you're going to see that and you're going to see that. We knew that there was something called the Great Movie Ride. We knew that there was something called Catastrophe Canyon. We had no idea what it was, though. In fact, when we wanted to be one of the first people there, so we planned to stay overnight in line if we could. So we started queuing up about 2 a.m, and they let us sit out there for about an hour and a half or 2 hours until they finally, someone decided that we were a nuisance to be on World Drive, and they opened up, and there were about 10 cars that did this. And they let us pull into where where today you go under the overpass from World Drive in order to go in. As prior to that overpass. So they let us pull in, and we parked there for a while. And suddenly there was this explosion off behind us. We had no idea what it was, but they were testing Catastrophe Canyon. They were cycling it all night long. So like every 10 minutes or so, this thing would go off. We had no idea. Just like, what is that? Oh, that'll be cool, I guess, when we find it. So they kept us out in the parking lot all night long. And then finally, about 5:30 in the morning, they let us move into the main parking lot off of the access road. And then we had to stay in our cars for another couple hours. And then finally, I think maybe 7:30, they let us out to go up to. And by that time, they were actually just letting regular cars go in ahead of us. So it was completely pointless for us to wait outside all that time because everyone else got in and they got to park a lot closer than we did. But yeah, but it was really nice. It was fun. It was fun to be at an opening. That was the first time I had ever done that. Saw a lot of celebrities, saw Michael Eisner, Bob Hope and all those folks. But it was cool to when they finally opened it up, it's like we just ran right past all the opening ceremony stuff. It's like, let's just find the first thing that we can get on and get on it.
And there wasn't that much to get on necessarily at the time either.
No, but it was, and we grabbed the maps, but we didn't stop and figure out what we were going to do next. We just ran to the first thing that we could find, which was Superstar Television, which in hindsight was dumb because we should have gone on the Great Movie Ride. Because after that, the line for the Great Movie Ride was like an hour and a half to 2 hours all day long, or the Backlot Tour or something there that had insane lines. But no, it was. I loved it. I thought it was a great experience. Although at the end of the day, my nerves were just completely frazzled because I was used to the nice, sedate Disney park. It's like you get in your car and you ride around and like some things happen. And we go to Disney MGM and like every ride, something's blowing up. There's fire, there's heat, there's like super loud noises. And then the Streetmosphere characters. It's like we hadn't experienced that before. So at the end of the day, I happened to turn 21 overnight while we were waiting to go in. So we went up to the catwalk bar so I could get my first drink. And finally, we were just trying to relax. And then one of the Streetmosphere people come over and start, doing their whole routine. And it's just like, oh my God, can I just have a moment to relax here?
It truly was the Park of Eisner. I mean, it was as loud and synergized and, put together as it possibly could be, even at the start. Now, you have a graphic design background. I'm sure your friends are artsy. Was there buzz about what this new studio, and of course Universal as well, but from an illustrative standpoint, right? The fact that they were making cartoons at Hollywood Studios, was that a conversation that you and your friends had about, well, geez, maybe this is the next Hollywood? Is this the next thing?
Oh, absolutely. So, I mean, to that point, that opened in 1989, and that year, Disney actually came to recruit animators at our school, students to go into the intern program. So we were very aware of what was going on there, and with our degrees being in this kind of split computer animation and graphic design thing, it's like we thought that this is going to be a real opportunity for Orlando to grow and become a real they kept calling it, it's going to be Hollywood East. I mean, there was a lot of buzz in the press. Their teachers were aware of it. They let us know. We had a large number of people from our school get accepted to the Disney internship program. Probably the best known one from around the time of my graduation was Aaron Blais. He went into the internship program. He worked his way up I think he started as an in-betweener and then went to an assistant animator. Then he animated Raja from Aladdin. And then, I can't remember what he did, but he moved. Eventually, he directed Brother Bear. He was one of the co-directors of Brother Bear. So it's like he did really, really well for himself, and it was perfect. I can remember actually being in school, and they would take all the classes' work every so often and put it up in a common area where you could see it. And he's 18 years old, and he's doing these illustrations that look legitimately like they could be in National Geographic magazine. It's like, okay, you're really talented.
He's got
you
it.
go do that. You're good.
Did you audition as well for the?
I did. There's actually a really odd, long, terrible story about that, because we actually had to fight the school in order to be allowed to be able to participate in the program. They were only going to let illustration students do it, and maybe fine arts, and they weren't going to allow any of the computer students to do it.
Boy, were they wrong.
So, yeah. Little did they realize, like 2 years later, or 3 years later, it's like, here comes Pixar in 95, and suddenly the whole world has changed. So we put on a little student protest to try to get their attention, where we did, and I don't know if this is a great idea in hindsight, where we did these like chalk outlines of Disney characters. First of all, we wanted to show that we could actually draw. So we did full-size chalk outlines of like Mickey and Donald and Goofy, as if they had been struck by vehicles at the crosswalk and the police had come and corned it off. Which did get their attention, because unfortunately somebody saw that, and then another person who was not part of the three of us that wanted to try out went and did an extremely graphic version of that at another crosswalk with blood and guts. And I was the student body president in my senior year, so I got called to the carpet from the school. It's like, what are you doing? What do you think you're doing? Why would you do this? I'm like, no, that wasn't us. I swear to God that. So, but eventually, yes, they did let us audition and try out. We did not make the cut, which was perfectly fine, but at least we got the opportunity to try.
I mean, it's really nice that you're so nice about it. But you had to have been gutted at least a little bit at the time. Did you think you had a shot?
Oh, well, I mean, yeah, because you're dumb.
Yeah, you're in college.
You know, right? You don't know. It's like and I would say, like, personally, it's like, I know I'm not the greatest freehand artist, and that's why I say, like, when I looked at, I think Dave actually legitimately had a very good chance at it, and possibly Will, who was the other guy in our group. I not so much. I probably would have been more of an effects animator or something, but those two could really draw exceptionally well. So I if nothing, I think it was, fair. It would have just been fair for them to try out. But the tryout itself was actually kind of interesting, because they gave you some situations that they wanted you to do some animated drawings of. In particular, they wanted you to I think you had to do a bouncing ball test, and then some stills, and they gave you a sheet of potential scenarios to choose from, and then some character sheets. They might have given us like a Goofy, a Mickey, and then Roger from 101 Dalmatians. So the one that I know, the situation with Roger was that, like, he's trying to open up a locked door with a key, and he's holding like 4 or 5 bags of groceries, and he's trying to balance it all while getting the door open, while unlocking the door so that he can go in. So I think they're trying to get, there's a lot of good figure work going on there, and, can you come up with a funny situation and things like that. So it was a fun test to do, whether I got it or not. It was enjoyable to do the tryout.
Yeah, in theory, at least, you technically did drawings for Disney. Maybe it wasn't, it's a fine line, but it certainly works. Yeah. It's certainly true.
It's fine.
So now we're entering a new era for Hollywood studios. I think that's pretty clear. As someone who's seen it through its lifespan, what do you think of the current changes happening?
If it's got to be alive. So this is where I put on my business hat. It's like, I really enjoyed it, through its iterations. If the world is not interested in how movies are made anymore, and let's face it, if everyone is in fact making their own movies, on their phones on a constant basis, maybe it's not that big of a deal anymore. So I'm just happy to see it stay relevant. I'm not going to get hung up about as much as I like the retro stuff. It's like, I realize, like, it's a business. It's got to go forward. Great Movie Ride was a great ride. It's like, but if something else will do better, it's like, then I'm not going to get hung up about it.
You talk a little bit about shenanigans you got into in college, but you also got into some shenanigans outside of college as well. Does the name Spike Tripper mean anything to you?
Yes, it does.
Tell us a little bit about Spike Tripper.
Well, the reason Spike is named Spike, first of all, it's me. And second of all, the reason I got that name is because, so to get back into the like constantly trying to like potentially work for Disney, and being interested in Imagineering, we're very, very interested in Imagineering. And there were no books. There was nothing, a couple of mentions in a couple of books, but there was no real information of like how anything worked or how you could get into it. So, or even what the disciplines were within Imagineering. So we kind of took it upon ourselves to find out how it worked. And so what we did is we started sneaking around some places. And Dave and I had the benefit of having, he had worked at the Magic Kingdom at one point in his life, so he knew his way around a little bit. And we became friendly with other people who were cast members and ex-cast members. So they knew the lay of the land a little bit. So we decided to take some risks and to do a little urban exploration to find out just how things work. What does an audio animatronic look like close up? How do they make fake rocks? What does that do? And then as time went on and we started noticing things closing and the threats of things closing, then we started to just document everything. So our mission at that point changed a little bit from let's find out how it works to just like, let's take as many pictures of as many things as possible, and videotape everything and just spend thousands of dollars on photos. So, but where Spike Tripper comes from was one day, Dave and I were, going to get into Pirates because he had found a door that was unlocked from the show building pretty consistently. So the way that you would do that, and don't try this at home, kids, because the world's...
There are cameras now.
This is pre 9/11.
Yeah. There
was very little technology. You had some, intrusion mats on the show level and some cameras in some places. But like now a motion sensor is like $5. So things are much different than they are today. And I think they're much more cognizant about keeping things locked that they used to. So we went back to the bathrooms in the Caribbean Plaza, so if you come out of Pirates and you kind of head to your left as you exit, or right if you're coming in from the plaza, there's those bathrooms back there where it says Caballeros and Damas. So if you head to the right around there, there's a little path that'll take you back to where the train tracks are. And you could hop over a little fence and then walk across the train tracks to where the show building is. Well, I was walking across the train tracks and I tripped on a railroad spike and landed on a track and ripped my pants and possibly like set off an audio cue that like the train was coming at the station down the line. So that's where Spike Tripper comes from.
And you guys had lots of different exploits as well.
The most famous one that everyone knows about is, Mesa Verde. When we went into, from the Mesa Verde Times website, it's like was going into Horizons. When that was prior to it closing the first time. And then later on, Dave and then Chief went in for hours at a time when it reopened again. So we did that. It's like we went up and explored the Progress City model from a catwalk up above the Wedway People Mover. We went out to when the train was closed, when they were putting in, I think it was when they were putting in Mickey's Birthday Land. It's like we walked the train tracks back to the Indian Village, back behind Big Thunder. I'm trying to think. There's a lot of things that you could do. It's like even one day we were just when MGM was under construction, stuff would be open all the time. It's like, so we wandered into the primetime, not the primetime, sorry, the sci-fi dine-in theater when it was just about finished up, and we walked in there and we're like, this looks weird, because you walk into that unfinished side, and I thought this would be done more. And then we came around the corner and then we saw the setup with the screen, and all the cars were still covered in plastic, so that way they wouldn't get dirty or scratched while the construction was going on. And one of my favorite stories to tell is the day that we walked into one of the final dress rehearsals for the Voyage of the Little Mermaid. So he knew that they were finishing up the pre-show area. Dave did. So we just wanted to go in and take pictures of all that stuff. And we went in, and we could see that there was kind of this door in the wall. And you could see sort of like some lockers and stuff back there. So we tried to avoid that as much as we could, because if someone actually walked past that door, they would see us. So we were in there taking some pictures. And then all of a sudden, the telephone starts ringing off in that room with that little door that's open. And we're just kind of looking at each other. We kind of froze, and we're thinking, oh, shoot, we're going to get caught now. And then just as we're thinking like, oh, this is it, these double doors burst open behind us, and these ninjas in like all black outfits come out, like 12, they're like a dozen ninjas. And one of them looks at Dave and I and says, did that phone just ring? And we just looked at each other and I'm like, yeah. And they didn't say anything else to us. They just walked back over and picked up the phone and called somebody. And then all the ninjas went into these other doors, like the doors to the show. So we kind of looked at each other and I'm like, well, let's go in. So we followed them in. And what we found out later on, once we actually saw the show done, is these are the puppeteers that are in the under the sea section, where it's the fish are all in black light and they're all in black outfits. So only the characters are illuminated and you don't really see the puppeteers. But we had no idea what in the hell was going on.
Yeah, you must have thought, man, they're taking some real creative risks here, adding ninjas to Little Mermaid.
Yeah, we just didn't know. So we went and found a seat and sat down, and there was, people in the back with mixing boards, getting everything set up. And, the director of the show was up front, and some people in suits and a bunch of people in polo shirts. And so we found a seat and we sat down, and then they ran Act 2. And it was kind of funny because, like when they were either setting up or getting down, it's like the person that was, and I can't remember the dog's name now from The Little Mermaid, Prince Eric's like old English sheepdog. Well, that guy was just standing up there and he had the head flopped off backwards. So the big furry costume is there, except there's a human head sticking out, and then the dog head hanging off the back of it. But so we watched Act 2, and then they started calling up everybody up to give them notes. And then I looked over and I realized we were sitting next to a security guard who had sat down. And I thought, once again, like, oh man, this is it. But he got up and walked up, and I was just like, all right, this is our cue. So we followed him out the door, and it was astonishing. Nobody said anything to us. Is there just a perception that you're doing this for very innocent reasons, and it's sort of a wonderful thing, but it is like so brazen that like no one would, you know what I mean? Like there's people all around doing all sorts of different things. Who would question that there's just other people? Right. I have heard, there's that old phrase. It's like, if you have a name tag and a clipboard, that you can go anywhere. And to an extent that's true. As long as you look like you fit in, it's like, cause you have to think, it's like, unless you're an actual security person who's trained to know, like, does something seem off here? It's like, you're just down there trying to do your job. We walked through the utilidors, at least a couple of times, and we were in street clothes, but we both had fairly short haircuts and were clean shaven. So we didn't look out of place. We didn't look like, at that point, it's like we're 20, 21, 22, 22, 23 years old. So it's not like we're 14. So yeah, you didn't stick out like a sore thumb. You just kind of blended in. Yeah, it was a miracle. It was, and if you did get caught, then you were just looking for a bathroom or first aid or something like that. And they would take you out and go like, oh yeah, go down there.
Speaking of getting caught, did you ever get caught, and what was the most risky almost caught that you can think of?
The closest, the one time that we got caught, so before Alien Encounter and before Stitch, the show was Mission to Mars. So the first time that we tried to go up to see the Progress City model, you walk into a break room. There's a door that was to the right of the entrance of where Alien Encounter is and where Mission to Mars was. That door position is kind of same. So to the right is like an employees, cast members only door, and it walks into a break room. And in that break room, there are stairs that go up and stairs that go down. And the stairs that go up give you access to like the top of the theater, and the stairs that go down give you access to like the bottom of the theater, so you could get to the projectors and switch out the film and that stuff. And in this case, it's like it would also let you out into the room where the air conditioning systems were, and that's how you would eventually get over to where the Progress City model was. So we walked in and there were like two cast members sitting there at a card table, like having a Coke or something. And they immediately looked at us, and then that's when you just went like, oh yeah, looking for a bathroom? And they're like, oh yeah, out there to the left, but not a word said. He had a lot more close shaves than I did. I was a lot more apprehensive to do things than they were.
Because you only went through Horizons once, correct?
Yeah. One time there, and then a bunch of I never did any of the long-term things that they did. I mean, the one thing I'll tell you, it is very thrilling to do this, but also the adrenaline level that's like running through your body, because you're not supposed to be doing this, but it's so cool and exciting at the same time. You're just hopped up on it. It's really, really interesting. We had a hike the day that I tripped on the railroad spike, and when we got into Pirates, we started looking around, and then we saw a flashlight, and we just beat it out of there as quickly as possible. The most dangerous one was probably Haunted Mansion, and only because you come in the mansion. You used to be able to go out of a door. If you walked into the exit, there was a door that goes outside of the part where you walk out on the right, and then you could go down a couple of stairs and then open up a door, and you end up underneath the unload platform of a mansion. And from there, you can walk out into the graveyard, and you basically have behind the scenes access to everywhere. Well, we took this like very creakily installed wooden ladder to go up into like the loft areas. And there are some places up there where when they were putting in the roofing nails, the nails just come into the top of the building like 5-6 inches. So if you put your head in the wrong place, you'd literally put your head through like some sort of like giant spiky nail thing. So that would have been deadly and not fun.
It's a good it's a good place to go, I suppose.
Yeah, that's true. And it's hot. Oh my gosh. I mean, the air conditioning inside the ride part is great, but we went in there in probably July or August, and it felt like it was 100 degrees once you get up to the top of the roof. We just came out drenched in sweat when we were done.
Now you talk a lot about your work with audio recording. Sony MZ1 mini disc seemed to be used by you quite a bit.
Yes.
But the idea of audio recording seems kind of easy, I think, for people at first, until they sort of get this understanding that there are many different speakers and many different things going on. So what was your process when it came to making these fan-made audios, and how did that incorporate something that you call on one of the blog posts that I saw, you call the head?
Yeah. So we started with much cruder technology. We started with just regular tape recorders. And some of the first things that we did was, this was another fellow's idea. So I can't say who it is yet. He's chosen not to come out. But he and Dave started doing dropping off audio recorders in horizons at certain points to try to get, the speaker sounds. And how you would do that is you would have a tripod with you, and then the bags that so we just went and bought like regular tape recorders, probably about the size of a Walkman, that had recording features. And then you'd put it inside like a little carry case bag with a hook on it. And then you take your tripod and you take the little arm of the tripod that you use to adjust, the tilt of the camera. And you would use that to kind of like take it and drop it on the ground outside of wherever you were. And then you would go back on the ride again. And then when you go by, you would take it again and sort of like fishing pole it and like pull it back up into the car with you, and then go home and listen to it. And you'd get a good, 20-minute, 30-minute loop of whatever the music was in that section. So that's how we started. And then I think I was frustrated by the quality of the audio recordings, and I was always a bit of a tinkerer. And I love new technology stuff. So when they came out with the mini disc player, I was like, well, this is a digital recording. And it was expensive. Those were like $700 at the time. But I had a pretty decent job, and I didn't have, rent. And I was still living at home, sadly. So I had extra money that I could use to buy stuff. And so I bought my first digital audio recorder. And I did some research somewhere about like what microphones were good. And I found out that Radio Shack actually sold these little tiny microphones that were flat, but the rating on them of what they could pick up was a full like 20 to 20. So it would do the entire sound spectrum. And a lot of microphones tend to be biased towards like, oh, it's like they only record in the upper end, and like maybe roll off the lows because they're made for vocals. But this got everything. So then I started doing audio recordings with that. And as you say, a lot of it became the idea of like, oh, well, how do I get this up next to a speaker so I can record it? And how loud does it need to be? And what volume do I put it at? And there used to be all kinds of things that would drive me crazy. Like I remember recording the Frontierland loop, and right where the speaker was that had that, it's like people are constantly coming by with those old metal strollers. So you just hear the clang through part of the thing from the strollers, which got frustrating. Or when I did one of the music outside the tiki room, it's like the store across the way sold wind chimes. So as soon as the wind would come up, it would start blowing the wind chimes, and you get the wind chime sound in there. So what eventually this person, who I cannot divulge the name of, figured out that if you went to Radio Shack and you bought a little transducer pickup that was made to record telephone calls, instead of recording the actual audio, you were recording the electromagnetic waves of the speaker directly. So once we switched over and started using those, the recordings were fabulous. I mean, you were basically getting almost as close to the source recording as you could without any background noise. So I have a vast combination of things that are done with that, and then things that were done with these really nice mics that I have. Disney MGM is what led me to the head. So when you went into the Monster Sound Show attraction there, and you came out of it, there was a little attraction called Sound Stations. And you would go in and sit in a booth, and they would do the lights, and you'd put on headphones. And they used this, I think the company that made it was AKG. It's this stereo wired mannequin head. I think it cost something like $20,000. It was an extremely expensive item. But the upshot was it recorded in true stereo sound, binaural. So the as they said, it's like the mics were placed like inside of this head, exactly where someone's ear canal would be, and they actually sculpted and modeled the ear canal, so it was as close to a real recording of what it would be like to actually be in that situation. And there was this great little show where you took on the persona of this character named RJ McBean, and they would give you a haircut and do a blow dryer, and they had all these different sounds going on in the room. And it sounded, I mean, it really did. I was just blown away by this thing. I mean, I was interested in music and a whole bunch of things. And so it's like, wow, that sounds awesome. And I started doing some research in the library with magazines, because that's about all you could do. And I found out what this thing was that they use. And I was like, oh my God, I don't have $20,000 to spend on this. But then I thought, well, I have this really flat microphone that I got from Radio Shack. That's awesome. So what if I got another one? Because I think they were only $30. They weren't incredibly expensive. And then what if I got one of those like foam heads that they put wigs on in stores, and I cut out a part of the foam so that way I can stick the microphones in there and they stay put, and they're about where a human ear would be. And so I did that. And sure enough, it wasn't as good as the $20,000 one, but it was pretty good. We got really good recordings with that. So I spent the next six or 8 months walking around the parks with a canvas bag with all of my video recording equipment, and then this styrofoam head that I could put the audio recorder in.
And no one questioned why you had a head in your canvas bag.
So back then, they didn't bag check. There was, again, this pre 9/11 world. It's like they didn't care what you walked in there with. I was just walking in with a bag full of, camera equipment, just like anybody else. Now, when I used it, oh yeah, then I got a ton of questions and a ton of weird looks. And in almost every one of my recordings, I have to edit out someone saying, "What is that?" And someone spending at least like a minute asking me, what in the heck is that thing that I'm walking around with? But it was great. We got to record 20K and a number of attractions that are gone, and you put on headphones and close your eyes, and it kind of feels like you're there.
That's awesome. Let's jump ahead. Nowadays, you're working in advertising, and advertising is an interesting field because it kind of falls squarely between creativity and commerce. What drew you towards advertising?
Well, I actually I did like a million things in between. So I've been the art director of magazines. I worked for department stores and did their stuff. I worked when CD-ROMs were hot. I did a lot of actually design and programming because we went through a time where it's like, well, the artist, you need to make a move. So it's like, you better learn how to program it too. So I've programmed like Lingo and ActionScript and jQuery and all kinds of stuff along with the art side of things. And honestly, I just eventually fell into this. I had worked in some advertising agencies. I actually worked for a traditional ad agency that worked primarily in the death care industry. So they supported funeral homes, and you know what? Those people are really super nice to work with. They're the people that we worked with that owned and operated funeral homes. They are some of the nicest. I swear, they are just overall. It's like they're just so nice and happy and fun loving, and it's a very service oriented business. So, their whole thing is really about trying to take care of the families that are coming to them. But when they're ready to have fun, they are ready to have fun, just like anybody else. So I got out of the digital space and then got back into the digital space, and just happened to find in the city where I wanted to be a company that was doing digital advertising for Walmart, which was really the right place to be when I started to do it. But, like I said, I always liked advertising. I like doing a lot of different things, I've been doing that with this company for 12 years now, which is really long. Most of the time, the companies in my area tend to just like dry up and blow away or get bought out. and then collapse. But knock on wood. And it's great. There's, for the longest time, there was always something new to learn, something different. So, we had Flash come in, and then now HTML5, and then apps, and there's, the technology is constantly changing. We're ready to start doing a lot of, AR and VR. And I think there's going to be another big shift with a lot of the new products that are coming out. So it's exciting. And I think the nice thing is you get to work with a lot of really big brands. So I've done lots and stuff for Disney. I was working, one of my clients was Toys R Us. So every time a Disney movie came out, it's like we always did something for them to support the toys or the DVD release or something like that. So in many odd ways, I never got to work for Disney, but I've done a lot of work for Disney without working for them. Yes.
And it seems like you've always been this way. You currently also have a lot of creative fingers and a lot of creative pies. In 2012, I think that's the accurate year, RetroWDW.com began. Tell us about your association with the site and a little bit about its origins. How did you get involved?
So I was looking, I'd been collecting knowledge and books and all of this stuff, thousands of pictures and all these audio recordings. And I hit, I think, about age 45, and I realized, and my own parents, started to pass away, my mom and my dad, and I saw the aftermath of, okay, we have this whole house full of stuff and who wants it? And I realized, wow, I'm going to have this whole house full of stuff, and who is going to want it? So I started to think about, well, I mean, I could die with this stuff sitting in a filing cabinet, and, it'll just get thrown away because my kids won't appreciate it. And so I got to find some way to start taking this information and this stuff that I have and just get it out into the world, because maybe it's useful for someone else. So that's what I started to do. I started with a website, and I started, podcasting was starting to be a thing. And it was really weird. It was actually because of Universal I ended up getting hooked up with Todd. So Todd McCartney, one of the hosts, he had been doing some film conversion for Brian, and I think Todd had decided he wanted to do a podcast. And he happened to be at Universal one day and took a picture of his kid with the Jaws shark, and I literally did the same thing like 5 minutes later. And he saw my picture and he was like, hey, I was just there. And so we got to know each other on Twitter. And I think at some point he was like, oh, I've been thinking about starting up this podcast thing. And I'm like, podcast? I think I'd like to do a podcast. And then I kind of told him who I was and what I had. And he was like, oh, okay. So that's it. It was we just kind of fell into it. JT had done some writing for Todd's site. I think he had started the site before the podcast. So we just kind of ended up getting thrown together, and it works. I was always, one of the things I was scared about doing it was like, oh, what is a co-host gonna be like? Are they going to be good? Is it, but like, and podcasts are tough because if you don't have, some people are really funny but have terrible voices to listen to, and we all sound okay. And I fortunately had enough experience actually doing audio work. So all of that experience that I had in the Disney parks when I was working for a multimedia company, I ended up stepping in and doing all the audio support. So I did a ton of like recording and editing and stuff like that. So I had some of the skills and the chops to do that, and knew enough about mics and things that I could get everybody set up. And we just started.
In many ways, you've all sort of taken on, like, as you said, like this archival sort of role, but not only for your own memories, but for fans as well. You've helped restore old Disney family videos, and even some, promo pieces that Disney had, and then, we really haven't seen since. Do you fill a void left open by the company itself? And why do you think that they don't cater more to those nostalgic memories?
Well, yeah, that's interesting. I guess in some ways we do. So, I'm not surprised. Again, if I think about it like a businessman, it's like they're they can sell nostalgia for the sake of merchandise, which I think they do a brilliant
Hmm.
job of. And I think that's why we see a lot of the merchandise has the nostalgia aspect. But like, you're not trying to promote what was there 20 years ago and is gone. You're not going to get anybody to buy a ticket or an annual pass or stay in a hotel because if you had wings was there. It's like you got to promote the new thing that's coming. So I get it 100%. It's like it's not their bag. They can do events like D23, which are fascinating and are always going to be better than anything that us could do out in the wild because they have access, to the people that actually worked on the rides. So, they can call Toady Baxter and have them come. And we're getting close to that, but we're not there yet.
Now, one of the benefits to gaining in popularity with the podcast and with the site is you've also had the opportunity to, go to different events like recently Epcot 35, and I believe you toured Spaceship Earth, correct?
That was incredible. That's the only way I can put that. So it's like the stuff that I used to do, except it was okay. There was I wasn't afraid of
It's all
getting
full
caught.
circle.
So, yeah, it's funny. That was a complete surprise. We signed up for the regular event and we went into the lottery pool of however they do it to get tickets for this extra dinner event. And I think there was only 70 slots or something. And somehow all four of us got in. There's no shenanigans. I know some people, I think, figured out there was like a URL structure. And if you put in the next number, you could like access the next event early. But we all just got in the day that it was supposed to be open. And we all got into this dinner thing. And we got to meet Bob Gurr again, who we actually had the night before at the event that we hosted, and a bunch of other people, Vice President of Epcot. But the real highlight of the night that made, food and drinks are okay, but they were like, okay, and now we're going to, the one thing that they told us is like, you're going to have to wear closed-toed shoes for whatever the last thing was. So we're like, okay. We're going to get a walkthrough of something. I hope it's not Frozen. I hope it's something else. And we thought maybe it would be Universe of Energy because we knew that was kind of winding down. But when they said, oh, you're going to do a walkthrough of Spaceship Earth, I think we were just like, oh, yes, we have hit the jackpot. So, yeah, they got us all together. We walked over to Spaceship Earth. They went through this very elaborate process of giving everybody a lock. So I guess the way this works operationally is if someone has to go into the ride, they'll actually put like a padlock on on the console and then give the person who's going up in the ride a key. And that's kind of a visual indicator of like, don't start the ride because someone's all up in there. So they literally had these boxes, which kind of goes against the point of it, I think, to like have a giant box with like all these locks stuck in it. But everybody had a lock. I guess maybe that helps know that like you got everybody back at the end of it and like nobody fell into a mastodon or something. So they took all these locks, they gave us all keys, and then we took one of the fun little, I don't know if it's a secret anymore because I think it's starting to get better known, is that so when you walk up to Spaceship Earth, there's that kind of mirrored part that actually touches the ground underneath it on the bottom, like right before where the entrance is. Well, there's a service elevator in there. And that's actually how they got all the props and things inside of Spaceship Earth when they were doing the construction. So they open up the door and there's just this, literally, it's just like this filthy service elevator. It's like right in the middle of it and like nothing fancy about it all. It's the type where like the little chainy thing like pulls down from the top.
Old
Very
school, yeah.
old school. Yeah. So we got into that and they took us up to the 4th floor and showed us around like this sort of secondary control room and told us a little bit about their procedures when like if someone steps out of the ride, it's like they have this little chart on the wall that they use. and they send one person down to the bottom of the ride and another person up to the top of the ride, and then they one person walks up while the other walks down, and they hope that they run into the person on the way. But they can tell from where the light indicator is, like which section they should start at, which was kind of fascinating. And like there is literally this like hanging file just full of blueprints like sitting off to the side. It's like, oh, if anyone noticed, if I happen to walk out with that. And they told us about I like stupid, weird stuff. So they told us that there was actually an open door, and they told us there was a bathroom there. You weren't allowed to use the bathroom during operating hours, because if you flush the toilet, you could hear it from the early man section, from which is right on the other side. It's just farther
back in the cave. That's the caveman bathroom.
Yeah. No privacy at all around this place. So, and then they're like, and that is the coldest drinking fountain like in Epcot. And so I'm like, well, that's it. I got to go get a drink of water. If that's the coldest one, I got to have a drink from the coldest drinking fountain. So I helped myself to a drink of water there. And then a couple of other people did the same thing. And so we went down, and then we walked the track from the bottom all the way up to the top, through all the show scenes. And they gave us a really nice behind the scenes, facts about some stuff. We were able to ask some questions. There were some things that I got to ask, which were always in the back of my mind, that they were able to answer finally. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Now I know this. Like one of my things. So I've been going to Epcot since '83, and they still have this, although it's a little fancier now. It's like when you first go up the lift to where the cavemen are. It's like there's those projections on the wall of, the fight between the mastodon and the cavemen, which then that's the story that the Oompa Day guy is telling around the campfire in the next scene. And when now it's 3D models, but when it was first done, they were actually pictures of like physical models. Like they had just like someone had actually built out the scene with the maquettes, like you always see in like the old behind the scenes shows. And then they just kind of like moved the photos around. And I always thought, well, that's weird. Why did they do that? It's like, I wonder if they always intended to actually put that there, but then for some reason they didn't. And so I asked, and I said, is there enough room behind that scrim where they could have a full scene? And the girl said, well, actually, you're right. They had planned to put the scene there, but they had decided that it was like too heavy for some reason. And so they scrapped the scene and then decided to go with the projections instead. And I was like, yes, I knew it. But we learned all kinds of interesting facts. There's some like telephones hidden up there, and for me, because I like the weird construction-y stuff, there are just like so many remnants of the old shows that are just still up there that it costs too much money to actually pull them out. So they just cover them up. In the Jeremy Irons version, there were like all these lights and things that as you would go down, and they literally like, they're still hanging there. They're just not turned on. There was a little city that you would go by with some fiber optic lights attached to it. She's like, oh yeah, that's over back behind that thing. And they literally just built like a little bit of a plywood wall and just hung like black curtains over it. And the curtains are now like starting to rip because it's been like 10 or 15 years since they put those up. So you could look right in and like, oh yeah, there's the city sitting right there. The best one is, and I saw someone tweeted out a picture of it tonight. There was this spaceship, this part of this space station that was up against the wall with a woman in it manipulating these big robot arms. And then the robot arms were attached to like these satellites with an astronaut on it. And they have a little dialogue. And the space station is still there. They just don't light it up. In fact, I thought they painted it black, but when I saw the picture tonight, it looks like it's still just kind of white. there's just no light over in that area. So the whole thing is right there. The place where the lady was is blacked out in plywood, but like it's that whole prop is still just sitting there. It's just so funny how that stuff is hiding in plain sight. I don't know if they will ever offer that again, but anybody who's listening to this, if you ever get the chance to do that, do it.
Yeah, boy, I hope they offer it again sometime, because that is definitely something I wouldn't want to miss. There's also one more organization I want to talk to you about. You are a founding member of the Bay Lake Society. Tell us what that is and how did that come about?
So Bay Lake Society is for those people who enjoy going to Walt Disney World, but don't necessarily want to go to the parks. It's about so the parks now are so frenzied and busy and hot and messy, and you got to get your fast pass selections 6 months in advance, and this is more about thinking of the old way of doing things where you're just going to the resort and relaxing. So we are pro, like, just going to a resort and sitting by the pool and checking out the bars and trying the alcoholic beverages and things like that. And how it actually started was a joke, like so many other things, and it just kind of took on its own life. So one day, I think Drunk at Disney made a joke on Twitter about Bay Lake Society and had some kind of old timey picture of like somebody from the 1920s with like a big giant tray of cocktails or something. And I think the joke originally was something about how expensive stuff was. And for some reason that name just stuck on me. And things were a little slow at work. So all of a sudden I was like, yeah, that's cool. It's like so I started to put together a logo for it. And as I'd make progress, I would tweet that out and some other people jumped on it. And suddenly we ended up with like 20 or 30 people that day that were like, yeah, that actually sounds like something I would do. And so three of us, Dustin Verdon, Drunky, and myself said, well, all right, let's do it. So we made it by the next day or two. It's like we had a website and started planning some get-togethers and things, and that's really what it turned out. We did some good charity stuff with it, sell T-shirts and things to raise some money. But it's just nice to get together with people and just hang out and relax. It's always good.
And it's free to be a member, so anyone listening should definitely check out the site.
That's right. Yeah, just go to Bay Lake Society on at Bay Lake Society on Twitter, and we're on Facebook too, and a couple other places. We need to get, like many things, it's like as time went on, we got a little less active, but we need to get back on the stick again and start seeing people, because it's just fun. It's just fun to go to Disney and have a couple cocktails or mocktails or whatever you like. We don't judge. You don't want to drink? I don't care. Just hang out and converse, and it's a nice group of people, and generally everybody's really fun. So.
As a charter member, though, you must have a favorite resort bar and a favorite drink. What would those be?
Oh, yeah. So I gotta give it to the Tambu Lounge for the Lapu Lapu. That is still one of the best drinks. Although I have to say, I was very surprised when Jock Lindsay's opened up. When my other hobbies is like I make cocktails, so I'm not the most educated guy, but I know a little about a little. And so I like a really good cocktail, especially a tropical. And Jock Lindsay's is a fascinating part, because those drinks are just all over the board. There are some really great ones, and there are some things like the anything goes, where you drink it and you're like, well, that was interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd ever have that again.
Yeah, for sure. As we kind of wrap up here, one of the things I would like to thank you for is another hobby that you have, which is doing graphic design work and using those chops for sort of Disney park themed shirts. And of course, what got you into wanting to make just sort of unique Disney t-shirts, things that they never say Disney, of course, and it's more themed than that. What draws you to that?
Yeah, so this is my lunch hour fun. So, so a couple of years ago, probably when we got around to like doing the podcast thing, it's like I trying to like not put the emphasis on Disney for a while and do some other stuff. And then I like started to get hooked back into it again. And I have this skill. So it's like, well, it'll be fun to do something that's around there. And for me, I think it's a nice creative icebreaker because, half of it is the look of the shirt and the design, but the other half is the idea. So to me, it's really fun to come up with, well, what is the idea of this thing going to be? Like, is there a joke that I can make? It's like, or there's an obscure reference that you can then take and spin into something else. And because I am also very cognizant of like Disney's copyrights and trademarks, and I don't want to do anything that crosses the line. So then that kind of becomes a little bit of the creative challenge as well, as like, how do you play within, the sandbox of, it's got to be a neat idea. It's got to be kind of Disney, but it can't be anything. It's like, can't be a character. Just can't redraw a logo. It's like, how do I put a unique spin on it? And I think it's funny that or interesting. I think this ties into the idea of the name of your podcast, because going through Journey into Imagination, just Dreamfinders' explanation of the creative process is literally the best explanation of the creative process that I think has been put out to the general public, because I think creativity is one of the least well understood things by people. I think there's a lot of false perceptions about it. Like, you have to be wild or crazy, or you have to just be an artist. But like everybody is creative in their own way. A bookkeeper can be creative. A writer. It's not just the creative arts things that we typically think of. It's like people are creative all the time and they don't realize it. And the Dreamfinder's whole explanation of like, you're going around and you're collecting experiences and putting them in the back of your head. And then you get a problem that you want to solve. And then you go back into all those experiences, your idea bag of things that you have, and you start pulling different things out and rearranging those in a unique combination in order to get a solution. It's like that is the creative act right there. That is the finest 6 minutes of writing I've ever seen of like, what is the creative process? And so that's what I like to do with the t-shirts. It's like, I think about, I may see something on Twitter that someone makes a comment about. I may think about, a throwaway line in a ride, or, a visual graphic. It's like, sometimes I'll just look at a font and think like, oh, it'd be really cool if it said this thing. And then that starts off a whole thing. Or with Retro Disney, it's like, well, I want to do something about an attraction. It's like, all right, well, I want to do something about the swan boats. So let me think, how can I express the swan boats without showing a swan boat? And you just riff off on that. So that's fun. You take my lunch hours. I usually try to limit to myself to like maybe 1 lunch hour or 2 lunch hours in order to get it done. So it keeps me using the software. It's like I'm still, I'm up there in Adobe Illustrator doing stuff all the time. I'm doing my typography, and I don't necessarily have, my job is my job. So it's very, very commercial. So this is kind of my chance to do, as close to fine art as I can do.
Well, on that note, Hal Bowers, thanks a lot for being on Dreamfinders. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And that's it for another episode of Dreamfinders. I'd like to thank Hal Bowers for being my guest on the show, and make sure to check out all of the amazing stuff he's got going on. Listen to the Retro WDW podcast and much more at retrowdw.com. Also, sign up for the Bay Lake Society at baylakesociety.com. And check out all of Hal's t-shirt designs at TeePublic under the username GoAwayGreen. Lastly, and this is something new that we didn't get a chance to talk about because it happened after our conversation, but Hal and the Retro WDW gang have created a new nonprofit organization to educate the public about the city of Lake Buena Vista, where Disney World resides. And you can learn all about that at the Lake Buena Vista Historical Society's website, lbvhistory.org. Our podcast artwork is provided by JP Tanner. Find his other work at tanwoodcreative.com. This podcast is distributed by WDW News Today, the world leader in Disney Parks news. Read all they have to offer at wdwnt.com. Dreamfinders is hosted and produced by yours truly, Nathan Hartman, who you can follow on Twitter at @SomeStuffISaid. Tell your friends about the show, and don't forget to give us a good old 5-star rating. That really helps get the word out, and we really appreciate it. Also, if you know of anyone who'd love to be on the program, feel free to email me at dreamfinders@wdwnt.com. I'm Nathan Hartman, and remember, if we can dream it, then we can do it.